Tēnā koutou te iwi, nau mai, piri mai ki te pai. This is the Pāhorangi, the podcast where we talk about Te Ao Māori through different generations. For example, ko Stacey Morrison aho.
Called James Daniels aho. I am Stacey's father. You can probably tell by the mouth.
Yes, that's kind of obvious. And today we're talking about education. He miharo ngā kōrero kei te haere, and so we are talking about gaps in education. What does success look like for Māori learners? Also, universities, are they still relevant? And what options do we have in the digital age? Kei konei e tahi mātanga, tēnā kōrua, Dr. Kerry Milner Ihimaira. So you have Kirimihi Consulting, and Mātauranga really is part of your whānau, isn't it?
Absolutely. We were brought up in the education world, and now in my consulting business I can choose where I want to work, but taking on a more strategic lens when it comes to education.
Ka pai, so let's talk strategically today.
Our other guest is Rangi Tutengai here, who's been in education almost all your life, from kohanga reo through to kura kaupapa. So how did you perceive being a kohanga kid? Did you realise that that was different to mainstream?
My education, I thought to myself, everyone got the same thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, I thought everyone got the same thing. Everyone spoke Māori. Everyone learnt the same songs. And so it wasn't until I was a bit older, probably intermediate years, where I started to see a lot of variation and difference between what I knew as my Mātauranga and my education compared to others.
I nāna kua hoki koe ki te ao ngā
Oia.
kura. And now you're a teacher yourself?
I am. I've been teaching for about 10 years now. Before that, I was a kaiawhina and just helping out here and there in different kura. And I ended up becoming a kaiako because I wanted to better help the kaiako in the kura. And then from there, I ended up getting a position, and well, here I am now.
Here you are, nau mai, piri mai. And Dr. Tākuta, so that means you've done a little bit of education as well, Kerry Milner Ihimaira. I know you have Kirimihi Consulting. So when we talk about Te Ao Mātauranga, you've done your best to provide as many children for that as possible. He ha atu o whāko, and what other experiences?
Yeah, well, I've done the teaching thing, the principal thing, found that way too hard. So now sort of in the consultancy work that I do, it's more of a strategic lens around providing advice, guidance, leadership to kura, to organisations, but again, a lot connected to that education piece about what is it that we need to do, what are the lessons that we can learn from the things that we've already done, but most importantly, how do we move forward?
Ka pai tēnei. So we're going to talk right across rautaki, day-to-day experience, te whānau o te kaupapa nei. But Kerry, when you look at your tamariki, what did you want them to experience in terms of education?
Yeah, I think my mum's a teacher or has been a teacher, so education is something that's around our dinner table conversations. So it wasn't really that difficult that when we had children that obviously we wanted Te Reo Māori. My son was sort of one of the first kohanga kids, so there weren't that many options. But I sort of talk about we can trace education evolvement through the ages of my children. So we wanted them to have much more, many more Māori experiences than myself and my husband had. So we have had...
So how old are they now?
Yeah, well, we've got, an age range of sort of 40 to 25 years.
You can't tell with Che. How old is he? Timeless.
40, nearly 40. But you know what I mean? So 40 years ago, there weren't as many options. But 25 years ago, our youngest daughter finished her education in wharekura at Waititi. So, we've been able to see the evolvement of those options. But for us, it was very clearly many more Māori experiences than we had. And that was an intentional education choice for myself and my husband and our whānau, really.
Yeah. Actually, something that I don't know that you know, James, is Kerry's daughter did the moko for your mokopuna.
Oh.
Mila, yeah.
Oh. Kia ora mō tēnā.
Neat, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Me love Mila.
Yeah.
Me love kairangi. Yeah. It's win-win.
But it's a very different experience, and I'm interested, Rangi, in what your perception of that. We talked about it briefly. When you are the tamaiti that's got all these wawata on top of you, how did you perceive that? Did you perceive that you were being given something that your parents didn't have, or they did, i a rātou rānei?
Sometimes I'm not sure if it's now in my later years I've created a narrative around that, or if it did happen. But in my own whakaro, I look at it and think, wasn't that the expectation on everyone? Whether you were to learn Te Reo Māori or was it normal for everyone? You know, koina te te aku whakaro, I just thought it was normal. How come?
It's funny, you walk in the footsteps of Hohua Tūtengai here, who I think is your grand-uncle. And he, in the 60s in Christchurch, was a massive influence on Māori, on Te Reo. He was obviously Māori in Christchurch in the 60s and 70s. So you follow in his footsteps. And with you being a kura kaupapa kid, for want of a better term, what is it that you think is success? What does success look like for Māori in education these days?
I would say it probably depends on what age bracket we're talking about. A lot of my whakaro, I lean towards what does success look like for primary intermediate kids? What does success look like for tamariki who are just transitioning from kohanga reo into kura kaupapa? And sometimes that success looks like I know my pēhea. I know exactly where I'm from. I know that mountain's name over there, and that is Maukatere. I know that river over there, that is Rakahuri. So when I look at success now through the lens of my adult eyes, I tend to veer towards what is success for our tamariki. And knowing who they are is probably a big one for me. And then, I guess on the education academic side, okay, e mohi ana ki te tātaki kupu? Do they know how to spell? Have they got their numbers in order? Kei te pēhea, tērā Mātauranga, where's that at? So yeah, my big one is, are they culturally sound? Do they know where they're from?
Me koe hoki, Kerry?
Well, I'm delighted in that response, because I think that's so important for us to think, ka pērā o mātou whakaro. But I think it's quite a loaded question, and I worry about the influence of education in schools on our thinking. So I think back to when our tamariki are born, and we've got this brand new tamaiti. We've got a 5-week-old mokopuna in our whānau, and I think back to holding her for the first time. And your aspirations for your tamariki and your mokopuna are things like you want them to be happy, you want them to be healthy, you want them to hold all of the whānau aspirations and achieve those. But then when they turn 5, all of a sudden our thinking changes. And again, the imposition of schooling on our thinking as a whānau, and all of a sudden we become obsessed about things like literacy and numeracy and NCEA scores and things as they get older. And so I just want us as a whānau to think more like this about our cultural standards of success first and foremost, and to perhaps understand the place that education, sits in the spaces in our thinking, and to really be clear about its influence and its control on our lives. And that makes us kind of think differently perhaps than what we might have thought when those babies were first born, and we looked at them and we had all sorts of hopes and dreams that are actually quite different once they start school.
Could you render that down, or could I render that down to an expression like education is learning how to learn rather than what to learn?
Mātauranga e rere ke anō. Yeah. And then Mātauranga is another. layer upon that, because I think what you're saying as well, Kiri, is it's this outward pressure of going, but do you know how to spell? And what is knowledge? What is valuable? What is going to get you a job? Because that's why I didn't learn Te Reo Māori at school, because it's like, well, I remember when I went to Japan as an AFS student, I remember that Dad said, that'd be good for your career. So it's this outside perception of what valuable knowledge is. Is that part of what you're saying here, and what we need to sort of adjust?
Well, and I think, again, Rangi's kōrero about times have changed, and we've now got more of a kura kaupapa, kōhanga, kura a iwi influence on our thinking, thank goodness. But without that, we do have these ideals about what's important and actually what's not important. And it's really those dinner table conversations for us to understand the influence of education and schooling on our thinking, and what, whether we understand that influence.
Oh, I might have a little extra to bring. I remember sitting in one of our parent-teacher conferences, and one of my whanaunga komene kururangi, all he wanted to know was, kei te paitaku tamaiti, kei te harikoa taku tamaiti. It was all about how...
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Are they happy?
Kei te whakatupu tātou, as the kura and the whānau, kei te whakatupu tātou i tētai tangata pai. Is this a good person that we're creating? That's all he wanted to know. I thought, fantastic. That's a beautiful perspective to approach education, because at the end of the day, we are trying to make good people in our kura kaupapa Māori. And regardless of the schooling type, I think we do want to make good people.
But regardless of the schooling type, you talk about what's called mainstream. What are the costs when we can't see ourselves or be ourselves in our education settings? Kia kōrua whakaaro. And we can tell you about what it felt like.
Well, again, I sort of... I think it's just an absolute no-brainer that we need to have, a million more kura kaupapa, kura a iwi, those kinds of options. 7% of tamariki Māori are in kura kaupapa, kura a iwi options across the country, and here in Te Waitangi, it's only 3% of our Māori kids. So, the majority of our tamariki mokopuna are in those mainstream schooling settings. And again, here in Te Waitangi, our options for accessing Te Reo Māori, Mātauranga Māori, in those mainstream settings are limited. And so when we think about what is it that our tamariki are going to get out of those mainstream settings, and are they having, our parents coming in, having those same conversations that you talk about with your whanaunga, is that the reality? Because the majority of our tamariki mokopuna are in mainstream settings that for most of the time don't really care too much about their taha Māori, and is that actually the job of the school, or is that the job of the whānau? But if we're looking at where we might want to move to for the future, and we've got examples of success happening in kura kaupapa, kura a iwi, immersion Māori environments, and yet we don't have access to that here in Te Waitangi, that's a challenge for us. And what are we going to do about that?
What should we do about that?
Well, I've got some ideas.
Few am I.
Well, I just think there's a real urgency. We need to play catch up. Other areas of the country, our whānau in other areas of the country are doing this wonderfully, and we don't have that provision here. So we can be upset about that, as we should, to perhaps start a bit of a fire in our puku, to then learn from all of those experiences everywhere else. And we should do things with urgency. We should ask our iwi, what are we doing about that? What are our runaka education strategies about Te Reo Māori provision, about standing up our own kura, about educating our whānau as to the importance of Te Reo Māori and how that helps with all sorts of other things. But it's an urgent conversation for us to have. We're behind the 8 ball, and we've got the ability to catch up and do some neat things, and we should do that.
Kiri, I understand what you've just said, and that we need to act now, and we do, but can we acknowledge that things have gotten better over the between generations? Like for you, Stacey, there weren't many options, as you said before, and so at least we're better than we were, but we're not as good as we could be. Is that fair?
It depends it comes back to that first question about what's success, what have we got better at? And again, if you look at the numbers of Te Reo Māori speakers we've got in our whānau, yes, that might have got better. Is that what we're measuring our success with? Or is it that, the education system is churning out better statistics? Like, it depends what that better definition is. Because I still see the challenges of our whānau. If we look at mainstream education, tamariki Māori are still underperforming, and we've got to be really careful that we're not buying into that argument that there's some genetic deficiency with us as Māori, because of course there's not, right? So the common denominator of all of our whānau in those mainstream education settings is the system. That the system doesn't work for us, and that's the reason why we're still underperforming. So what would it look like if we had a different system, something that was not just getting better at tweaking that existing system, but actually really putting that to bed and saying we don't want to do that anymore, and what's this new system that we're going to create together, what's that going to look like?
Yeah, so that's why I've found myself on 3 different school boards for kura auraki with my tamariki and numaki. But you need, in my experience, the principals who are on board with it, because if you can't have that scrap every day, hōharawa atu. And we've seen some real innovative options. And the tamariki who are great, and Māori are great in English as well. And so if we get it right, I've seen it work. But Rangi, I'm interested in a point that Kiri made about our responsibility as whānau and then what we expect of you at the kura. Because ki au nei, ka whāngai au I waku tamariki ki Te Reo Māori, mā koutou e whakapakari. But that's not the case for all of us, and then we get really upset and hurt because it brings up language trauma going, I'm just trying to give my kid what I didn't have. I can't give it to them at home. So what do you see in terms of that parental hope and wish and whānau wishes?
Yeah, I have seen in my own experience that whānau are not trauma dumping, but they are putting their dreams or their desires were as children. I wish I had Te Reo Māori. Yeah. I wish I was educated in a kura a iwi, a kura kaupapa Māori, and we do see that, but sometimes with no support from whānau. But there are, like yourself, whānau who, if they're wanting Te Reo Māori, they will do their best at home alongside of the kura, which is fantastic, and that's the type of whānau that we hope come to kura kaupapa Māori, kura a iwi, because...
Sorry, there wasn't one close. Oh,
yeah. Because they're the type of whānau who really want to support the kaupapa. And if the kaupapa is to educate our tamariki in Te Reo Māori, then they're on board. They're doing something about it. At our kura kaupapa, we have an expectation of the whānau. We actually expect our whānau to go away, to attend ātārangi classes, to enroll into te wānanga wā o te aroa, whatever the kaupapa is, that they're upskilling alongside of their tamariki, because if we put all of that expectation on our tamariki, that's a lonely journey. It's a very lonely journey. And so from what I've seen with some whānau, that tamaiti ends up leaving Te Reo Māori. And the majority of the time they only speak English.
I think it'd be fair to say, though, that it's also tough and traumatic even for the parents, because Stacey has a brother, and he and his wife have 2 young ones, her nephews, who one's at kura kaupapa and the other's at kohanga, and the parents are not fluent by any stretch of the imagination, but they are going to classes, but they struggle with the fact that that their kids are more fluent than they are.
Yeah.
And so I feel for them, for the parents in this case, because they're getting behind the bus, and those kids are on the bus. Tika?
But yeah, no, tika. And I've seen that, and we've got to, I think that's why it's good to have these conversations.
Yeah.
So you're not alone. You're not the only one person who's got kids that kura kaupapa and can't actually understand everything, or not quite sure why, what we're doing. And then you start to question yourself as a parent, kei te tika rānei taku whakatau kia pēnei. Am I doing the right thing? But I guess if I can ask you, Koro Pops, when you look at the range of education experiences your mokopuna have had compared to yours, compared to mine, and what do you see? Are they flourishing as great learners?
You're going to make me cry.
I was hoping so.
No, yeah, like I was the dux of my primary school.
Well done.
It's not a thing.
And
at
that was
primary
very mainstream, but there was no Māori at all. As I said before, we didn't learn about the Treaty of Waitangi in the late 60s. We learned about 1066, the Battle of Hastings, and how important that was to us, and so on and so on. And I'm glad that I know about that, but I'm sad that we didn't learn anything about Te Ahu Māori in those days. And then Stacey comes along, unexpectedly, by the way, and she went to a mainstream high school, Aranui, and they were really supportive, weren't they, in principle. And then when she went away to Japan on her AFS year, and then had to learn Japanese, realising, I think, that the vowel sounds were the same, and then she came back fired up about learning the reo. Or you can possibly tell more about that. But then the next generation, which are her children, who Māori is their first language, and that's a beautiful thing. I don't understand everything they're saying about me, but...
And sometimes you
I get
say
the
confusing things to them. When my son was a toddler, he'd go, put it raro. And he kept on putting it runga.
Oh, yeah.
You thought runga was raro.
Yeah, okay. Well, in my world it was. But yeah, so then you've got that generation, and then, Hawaii's now 18, coming up 19, your oldest, and now the younger ones are 7 and 4, but it's actually really beautiful seeing it all. It's like the seed, the kākano flourishing. It is seed, isn't it? Kākano,
kākano,
right? And that's a beautiful thing. That's what makes me cry.
Yeah.
We're getting somewhere with this. Is my point, When I went to school, primary school certainly, you look at the school photos, one brown face, and then even in the rugby through the 70s, I was virtually the only one through the 70s, and I was playing senior rugby in Christchurch with and against All Blacks. Just the way things were, particularly in the South Island. I mean, the North Island's like a different country compared to the South Island.
Ko whea ko koe tēnā rangi, have you felt that the te ka Māui is like so different from te Waitangi?
Oh, yeah, tēnō rereke. I was actually talking about this with my wahine the other day, and she had attended Tātamu's uhunga, and she was talking about, ngai tahu this, ngai tahu that, tu whare toa this, tu whare toa that, in a good way, not in a bad way. Sorry, I should preface that. But she was talking about the difference and the perspective that the people here were holding in regards to measuring oneself to another.
Kia ora.
And it was an interesting conversation, particularly around, what's Māori enough? Okay, does te waipunamu have to compete with being Māori and measuring ourselves as being Māori against te ka Māui?
Kia ora.
And it's a very interesting conversation, and I would put myself out there and put my neck on the line to say actually a lot of the te waipunamu has experienced that as, am I Māori enough? But I wouldn't limit it to us. Sometimes insecurity is in everybody. And so that particular whakaro is in quite a lot of us.
And it's happened in recent years, this perception that Ngāi Tahu's fiscally rich and culturally poor. But you've experienced, te ka Māui, and you've come home to Murihiku, kua kumea te waka, ki raro nei, he pēhea o whakaro. And in the context, it is education because it's perception of value, isn't it? And perception of value of knowledge.
Yeah, definitely experienced both and definitely agree, you know, they're very different worlds. And again, you see things here in, in Murihiku that you know, it's just tikanga, but we might not even understand that it's just something it's been a cultural practice that's
tika.
never stopped. You know, it's never ceased to be applied to different situations. So we're rich in cultural practice,
Very.
rich in connection to tai ao, rich in terms of whakapapa, and maybe the success factor, the measure is Te Reo Māori, and we're on a bit of a renaissance journey around that. But if we sort of bring those things into the education setting, we've still got schools who don't understand those practices. So, as an example, I was at a Polytech who, you know, didn't understand that students were going to have to be leaving their course to go birding.
Yeah.
And again, if you look at education research, we know that students who are more culturally located are going to do better, which is why we've had this big discussion around Te Reo Māori and why that's so important. So we've got whānau who are still birders, who continue to practice that, have never ceased doing that, but you've got this dilemma of, do I go and maintain that cultural expression, that thing that's just always what our whānau do, at the expense of potentially my qualification that I'm going to be marked absent for 2 weeks.
Kia ora.
And so to explain that to the Polytech, that it shouldn't be that our tauira have to make a choice, and in fact it's not actually a choice that they've got anything any control over. So as the example could be that a school or a Polytech could understand that cultural practice, understand that it's unbroken, understand the importance of it, and reorganise their curriculum, reorganise their assessments, reorganise their attendance to ensure that our whānau don't have to choose. They can absolutely be Māori and fulfil those cultural obligations within their education setting. So I think sometimes we make it far too complicated, but actually we've got to put pressure on our education, the system again, and the people in power, whether it be tūmoaki, whether it be whatever of Polytechs, to just kind of stand up a bit more for ourselves, I think.
That takes us back to what I was saying before, that very basic belief of mine that it's not about what you learn, it's about that you learn and how you learn. And they're learning their cultural practices, as you say, and that is part of growing. Having a curriculum that says you have to be able to spell or and all that stuff.
I want to know how to do birding. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to know because it feels far too hard. But I mean, that birding knowledge, for example, that absolutely I have no experience or knowledge about whatsoever. So that's my disclaimer.
I know how to eat them.
But yeah, enjoy them. But that's a science degree. That's a maths program. That's a literacy program. That's so again,
History.
let's not kid ourselves that Māori knowledge is somehow secondary, not as important, less. It's actually it could be the pathway to, I don't know, an academic career if that was important. But I just think schools separate the two worlds.
And Mātauranga Māori doesn't.
And make it too difficult for our whānau to reclaim, that knowledge that we're so hungry for.
Yeah, so because within that, yes, there's science, there's also PE, there's outdoor education, there is planning, there's logistics, there's mathematics, there's so many different things. Mena have whānau ngā whakaro. But Rangi, did you, in your education experience, did you find that people didn't understand what you knew? Do you know what I mean? Like you were sort of underestimated? Because it's a different kind of knowledge system.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought birding up because actually that's where my wahine and I got to. We said, Te Waitangi is rich in ngā mahi ahu rea, mahi kai.
Right.
all those many practices, even pounamu. And so I'm glad you brought that up. It's fantastic that. But I underestimated, or maybe overestimated as well. I remember attending a hui when I was perhaps in wharekura, in my early wharekura years, and one of the facilitators asked me to write on this big A3 piece of paper, or maybe a A2 piece of paper, and the whole hui was in English. And at the time I was struggling to tuhi ki te reo Pākehā. I couldn't spell to save my life. So they looked at me and they said, "Oh, this person looks very smart." But I wasn't smart in that way. I wasn't smart in that way. But I do...
E hi o tau i taua wai, how old were you?
I would say I was probably 14. 14. I had a rudimentary understanding of how to spell in English. But as soon as I was put on the spot, Kyle.
When we talk about language trauma, it comes in many forms.
So mine was the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah, my language trauma is in the other direction of our earlier conversation.
But you got there in the end. Kei te
Yes.
kuro Pākehā mai koe.
Yeah. Rau e taku reo Pākehā. I think because of that little trauma, and that's probably my biggest memory that I have of not being good enough in Te Reo Pākehā. And it drove me in my later years when I was following my tohu paitahi Te Reo Māori, because one of my whaia, Hani Huata, tēnā koe te whaia, she encouraged me to do a degree in Te Reo Māori because she knew it would help me in many different ways. And one of the things that they added into my degree was a tohu called Celta. It's a tohu to teach English as a second language to adults. And so I had to, one, become very, very proficient at my awareness and fluency of Te Reo Pākehā, and then second, to teach it. And that was a big learning, a big undertaking for me at the time. But I remember in my interview for that tohu, because you had to be interviewed to actually get into that portion of whai taua tohu, and they said to me, why do you want to do this tohu? My response to them was, well, actually I have no interest in teaching English to adults as a second language. However, I do want to take what I'm learning here and give it to my Māori people. And it would support me in what I do here as an educator, whether it's to adults or for children. The benefit I got from that kaupapa was my delivery of Te Reo Māori i roto i ngā kura.
Yeah, because you haven't been through the second language learning experience of Māori.
Oh.
So you're seeing it from a different perspective. But Kerry, people tend to freak out and go, oh, all your kids speak Māori. What's their English like, though?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, we've got to be really careful that the measure that we're aspiring to isn't that mainstream Pākehā measure, and then can we do that in Māori, or can we have our little play with Māori as long as we get to those mainstream measures. So it's really, really important that, again, that's part of our education process as whānau, that we have, a bit of a disruption to the status quo, a bit of understanding of the ongoing impact of colonisation, not just on our structures and our systems, but in our minds, that kind of hold us up from believing that we had inherent knowledge, before our takata pōra arrived. We had our own knowledge systems, and those are just as legitimate now in terms of education as they've always been. But we tend to kind of see those as needing to fit in to our achievement first and foremost of Western tohu, Mātauranga, and that's an education process for us as whānau to have these kinds of discussions to understand that impact, but then to kind of search for what else is there to enable us to realise those Māori aims and aspirations that we've always had.
Yeah, but your kids learned English pretty easily, right?
But what if we didn't
Yeah.
care about that?
Yeah.
Like, when will we get to a time and a space where that's actually not even important? Because of course they're going to. And we don't even care about that anymore, that we're confident enough in our own abilities and our own belief in who we are as that magic ingredient, that superpower, that English is just kind of like a little byproduct. We don't even care about, it's not important. Unfortunately, it's something we're going to absorb and learn about, great. But actually, what if we just didn't give it a thought? And it was about an intentionality of disrupting that thinking in our minds to intentionally look for that other pathway. That's about that reclamation. It's about believing in ourselves. It's about that kind of Mātauranga that should be able to be found in any of our primary schools, just up the road. Whānau shouldn't have to get in the car, go across town, shift communities to try to find the very few opportunities for Te Reo Māori and cultural renaissance in our schools. It should be just as normal as turning up to school and learning about, I don't know, whatever schools learn about, those kinds of disruptions to our thinking.
Yeah. It's because of some of the things that you then get told, though. Like, I remember when you were at broadcasting school, they said it's good you didn't sound like a Māori, right?
Oh, yeah. That was how I got in, really, is that... and in the early days, I joined broadcasting in 1978, and there weren't many Māori broadcasters at that time, certainly not commercial. And, they thought, oh, he doesn't sound Māori. And that's what would happen when I'd meet people in the street. They'd say, are you James Daniels? And I was on ZM at this stage. And I'd say, yeah. And they'd say, oh. And I'd say, what, I'm not tall, dark and handsome. And they go, no. And I go, well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And they go, no, but you don't speak, you speak normal. And I say, what? I don't say, hello, you fellas, how you doing? And they go, no, you don't talk like that. And I said, no, I don't. I just talk like this. I've always spoken like this. So, and that was a plus for me, but I didn't sort of think of it or realise how I should be a wee bit ashamed about that as to why I got to that place in broadcasting, because of how I sounded. And I've always sounded like this, haven't I? Apart from when I'm yelling at you.
As far as I remember. No, but I think it's about the environment. Or tautahine, like in Christchurch, it was, very easy to say that, right? And it's a compliment to sound like, what a well-educated Māori you are.
Again, I think times have changed, thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
And so again, our pakeke who have, my dad, who has that apology for not being able to speak Māori. It's not an apology, it's an understanding of, at that time,
Circumstances.
Circumstances, but also the deliberate stripping of Te Reo Māori from whānau, legislation, punishment in schools, and those are the hangovers of that's why. So there's no need to apologise, and we understand that at that time that's what was attractive and what was, seen as a skill to not sound Māori. But now things have changed. And now we've sort of got fluent speakers of Te Reo Māori who are able to be broadcasters and be broadcasters in Te Reo Māori. So it's just, if we look at anything, the evolution of what it was like then, times have changed. But I worry about the time, like it's kind of like it's a retreat back to some of those attitudes in our education policy and system.
Well, 6 Māori words having to be too much.
Well, that's because of the current coalition government. That's what that's all about. So, but one thing about with Stacey's my moko being having Te Reo as their first language, it's really interesting because Hawaii 18, 19 years ago, most of his English came from the likes of myself and Dee Dee, my wife, because we were around him quite a bit, and he only heard Te Reo from his parents. But the other thing is that he heard a lot of English through television, and he had a bit of an American-y accent, you know, because of that. And it's not even that Southland accent, you know. And I noticed that as well with the youngest ones who are at the kura kaupapa now and the kohanga. They're very similar, aren't they, Tahu and Taika? Hey.
Pēhea te reo kōrero, ka rere wainga nui ngā tamariki. Are we all good with everyone sticking to Māori at kura? Because it's not always the case.
Oh, it's not always the case. Even in kura āiwi, kura kaupapa Māori, the struggle is real sometimes. I think tamariki are clever. Tamariki are very clever. They understand that actually, particularly here in Ōtautahi, Te Reo Māori is not the dominant language of Ōtautahi. We're looking at an environment where actually you are the minority, and you and our tamariki see that. They see that, so they will definitely switch. They will switch to Te Reo Pākehā as their dominant reo. But in that I see that's very clever. You know, to be able to understand that, okay, the majority of the people that I'm interacting with, the things that I require for my life, is through Te Reo Pākehā. And I don't want to turn it into a reo thing, but I do want to highlight that actually our tamariki are clever. Our tamariki are very clever.
Yeah, stop underestimating them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they do. They judge, like, if ki te kōrero Pākehā mai tētahi, they speak English if they speak English to them, and if they speak Māori, then they'll adapt. And so that's the thing about being more ambitious for our tamariki. What does that look like? What are the resources, the systemic changes that you think we need to make sure that they can just be their excellent bilingual, trilingual, polyglot selves? Yeah.
Well, I think, again, the expectations that we put on our tamariki, like you come to, you know, kura, and, you know, me reo Māori koe, you know, aonoa, pōnoa, but then outside of that, nobody else is doing that. Why? Why have we got that expectation on our tamariki? So our challenge is to ensure that that environment, that community environment, that te reo Māori is normal, is natural, so that they don't have to have the survival instinct of, like, I need to be safe in kōrero Pākehā. So again, our challenge, I think, is to put pressure on our local, you know, all of our mainstream schools, for them to step up with urgency around te reo Māori, so that it's not just the kura kaupapa, kura āiwi that are the havens for te reo Māori provision. Now, there's challenges, right? There's not enough kaiako Māori and all of that. So again, from an iwi perspective, let's leverage our iwi perspective to sort of say there are other ways that we can put kaiako in schools. Like, let's look at our own training provision. How will we grab the te reo Māori speakers that we've already got to make this mahi kaiako an attractive proposition for them?
Boarding houses like you have in private schools?
There's just so many different options, but we should be looking at that, and we should be seeing that education is such a key pillar for the future success of our iwi. What are we doing to stand those things up with some urgency, and that what we've currently got doesn't deliver the goods for us, and so what are we going to do that's deliberately different, designed based on our successes, the things that we know will work, but as an iwi, what will we do with urgency to stand that up, like, immediately, quickly? We can't wait for 3-4 years of training kaiako, and then we might have one more kura here in Te Waitangi. Like, it's got to be something. What are we doing?
Is hangaro one of the options there in terms of technology? Hangaro technology.
Oh.
Yeah. Is that one of the options for the immediacy to create these rauemi wera momo āwhatanga? He pēhea o whakaro. What do you think, Rangi?
I think competency would have to rise with that as well.
Yes.
So as a pauka, I'm talking as a pauka right now. Yes. If we're not digitally literate, if we're not competent with the device or the ngā taupanga, the apps or whatever form it comes in, then it will fall over. It'll fall over. So although that hangaro might be there to support us, and it might be an instant remedy, if our kaiako aren't willing to change or learn, then it's going to go nowhere. And it's quite a sad thing to actually think about and talk about. But I would say if we as kaiako take it on, then I definitely believe that we could see a greater success.
Kia ora. Yeah, because one of the things that my son said to me, kei te piringa o kia whea koe te whānau o te ao Mātauranga. And that's when he chose to go to a school that I really didn't expect that he'd choose to go to. And it was great for him in the end. But he wanted to do chemistry, he wanted to do bio, he wanted to do, in the end, athletic performance, those kind of things. What was your perception of that as a kura kid? Did you feel like you had limited options? Is that a take? Is that an issue still?
Oh yeah, definitely. As a kura kid, we did have limited options. Your Māoritanga was pretty much it. And then whatever we could learn or whoever we could rope into our kura kaupapa to teach things like pūtaiao, science, to teach any other kaupapa, then we would pull them in. But I think at times we probably only had about 5 teachers in our wharekura side to deliver kaupapa to us, to deliver our subjects to us. So, it was limited, but I do mihi to those pauako who came in. We had one fantastic pauako, Piripi Prendergast. Fantastic human being. Fantastic human being. And I
he was Mr. Prendergast to us.
Mr. Prendergast. Well, he was matua piripi to us. And I very much enjoyed his akoranga. He used to teach us Te Reo Pākehā. And I actually learnt so much from his lessons, and I appreciate now, especially when I went to university, to Polytechnic, I've realised, wow, he actually taught me everything I needed to do to write an essay. He taught me a lot of things to do in relation to researching. And then I mihi to him too for the kaupapa around hitoria, a lot of our historical events. He taught us those. The tragedy of Waitangi. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a real out there kaupapa. But his passion towards education, amazing. And it's been a long-lasting, I would even say it might be a core memory of mine that actually, wow, this man is a fantastic educator.
Yeah.
And so I hope to make him proud in that respect of being amazing in the classroom.
And that goes back to your kōrero, kora pops, when you were saying it's really about the love for learning, because when you were at school, lots of people left at 5th form or year 11, and then eventually you went back to university. But when they wharewananga, I feel, because I'm studying for a Masters of Technological Futures, I feel like a lot of them need to be more agile.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, who wants to go to uni and go, you must, this is what education looks like, this is how you get educated. Don't they need to move?
And education is just such a slow-moving beast. You know, we talk about it being sort of like the super tanker that you turn you put the program in, the movement, and it still takes hours for it to even actually slightly move. We need like quick, little speedboaty options,
Jet skis.
Whatever. And I was going to say earlier, it's sort of like we sort of need to think about it like a smorgasbord of there is a range of things for us to feast on and choose the things that we think are neat and important at the time, but it's a range, and all of those things, whether it be technology, whether it be certain people that come in and help, whether it like whatever, we need all of those options. And I kind of feel like we're like the little restaurant that has a waiting list, and it takes months to get a table, and by the time you get the table, you've already gone somewhere else and you've had 10 other kai and it, and you're sick of waiting.
I'll just make a YouTube channel, thanks.
So, you know what I mean? Like, so all of those, whatever the options are, we need to have heaps of options, like a smorgasbord that we choose, what works, what doesn't work. Oh, I'm never going to go back and try that one again, but there's a range of options. And I worry that at the moment there aren't those options for our whānau to feast on, to have a think about what would they like. And so we end up just replicating the same old, simply because there's actually nothing else for us to choose.
In mātua rā, we need to see that we are a whānau of learners, or, we are people who learn. So, you go back to university, you keep on learning. Koe kite koe te rā āhuatanga, does it, when whānau are activated to learn, does that activate, general, what we consider success, I guess, in education?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would even say the best success sits with early childhood centres, kohanga reo, and they're also the most adaptable.
Yeah.
I would say they're trailblazers in terms of the way education looks. You go to a kohanga reo, you go to a ECE, and you see the joy in tamariki, what the pauako are doing with the tamariki, and it's fantastic. I do want to comment, like sometimes university is the most rigid one.
Yeah,
and it's the one with the least amount of change.
The most square.
The most
That's what
square.
old people call
It's
it,
the
square.
most-
And it's just like the buildings that we go to universities in. It's old school. And kia one me pingore ake, it needs to be more flexible.
Yeah, tika me pingohe.
And funky.
Yeah. But also, I think, at year 11, 12, 13, I've realised one of my tamariki, she shall remain unnamed, she treats kura like uni a little bit. She's like, I'm just going to do that here. I've gone to my class. I've already done that. But,
Yes.
Ticking it off.
well, if you know how to learn, then you know how to run your life as a learner.
Yeah.
Well, I think our current education minister is sort of talking about students gaming NCEA, and that's why she wants to change. I'm like, that's awesome that our tamariki know how to, right?
Yeah.
And again, as adults, if we can see a better way, a quicker way, something, why wouldn't we be doing that? So I think, like, again, that range of options that you can have a short course if you want that, you could finish your NCEA level 3 and university entrance early. Why can't you finish that in year 12? Many of our kura, but actually other schools are doing that to enable your year 13 year to be much more of a, cherry pick the things that you might be interested in.
Credentials
right?
on your
All
phone.
of that, short little
Te Ahu.
courses. So again, I think we've got to move with the times, and universities, polytechs are very rigid and not able to sort of think in those flexible ways. And again, make it like, overthink it, as if we're so complex and we're so important, but actually you're just so old and we're turning away from that. And
You're still wearing walk shorts.
Yeah, people are not interested.
Yeah, but actually the kaupapa of wānanga is what we've always done. We have a place called Wānaka here, which is literally, and it's always been about the people, the right people for the wānanga will find the wānanga and the wānanga will find them. E pēhea o whakaro ki taua kōrero rangi, in terms of we've always been higher learners.
Oh, definitely. I would say in terms, like even this whare that we're sitting in right now, tae pira nangata. Tai mai ia ki konei, ako ia ki konei, me aro. But even outside of the walls of a school, higher learning is our kaupapa. That is our thing. Like right now is whitebaiting season. Like, oh my gosh, there's heaps of tamariki on the river right now who could tell you exactly when the schools of inanga are coming through, how much they're going to be catching, how to catch them, which way does the net actually face, because a lot of us would probably get it wrong.
Yeah.
So, higher learning.
Koe patai mai ki au.
But, it's also being connected to your environment. That I would say it's a good testament to what higher learning actually should be. It's what do you know in a classroom and out of a classroom.
Kia ora. O tēnā kōrua I wenei kōrero rangatira rau atu, kua puta I a kōrua I te rānei. I think, Kerry, I loved how you said, you're old, get out of the way. Like, you can't always just judge, the thinking is always new, is what I see. And with rangi, ka titia ki taku ngā koutou kōrero, I will remember how you experienced, sometimes being overestimated and underestimated as a kura kid. What are some of the things you have taken out of today, apart from when you cried?
Thanks for that. Yeah. Oh, look, it's funny, we're talking about education, and I think I've learned a hell of a lot. Made me think. But anyway, you put take on the table, and it's for us to feast on and do something with. So it's been great.
Ka pai. And have we had some shared reanga experiences that we didn't know about?
Yeah.
Pai tēnā? Okay, well, kua ea. Kua ea, we've managed what we wanted to do here on Te Pai.